Hello, horses and hypocrites. My name is TB Skyen, and we're going to be continuing our look at the Shadow Isles champions who have been receiving some minor lore updates in preparation for presumably the upcoming Mordekaiser rework, which is coming out soon, and I can't believe I actually forgot about that. So, in the Callista video, I was like, why are they making changes to the Shadow Isles champions? That's weird. No, it's because Mordekaiser is coming out, obviously. So thanks to the people in the comments on that video who pointed that out to me. So, for the moment, we're going to be looking at one of the other major players in the Shadow Isles, Hecarim, the Shadow of War, and asking, what's the deal with that guy? What's his whole thing? So, as usual, we'll be starting with a look at his lore, what the lore is, what kind of character he's supposed to be, and then we'll move on to the character design and try and figure out how well the character design manages to express the character himself. Now, Hecarim is a pretty old character. He was released originally, I think, back in 2012, and so a lot of the modern updates and conventions and sort of the aesthetic and narrative conventions that have been emerging with a lot of the Shadow Isles champions that is sort of being unified into a region didn't really exist back then. Like, this is before even this was back when the League of Legends itself was still a thing in League of Legends lore. And so there's obviously going to be a bit of a disconnect there. He's an old champion. He's designed from an old set of aesthetics. He's designed from an old conception of what the League of Legends universe is. But, you know, that gives us an opportunity to comment on how well the new lore that they have written for him manages to take the character that he was and update it for a modern convention of the League of Legends universe. Anyway, if you watch the Callista episode, which was the last one we did, you already know the basic outline of a lot of what's going to be happening here. But basically, Hecarim is yet another one of the soldiers of the Empire of the Ruined King. Back before he was the Ruined King, when he was just the king, I guess. The ancient empire was on Valorant, did a bunch of stuff, very big, very important, good things happened there. And then everything went all to hell. Hecarim himself was born into something called the Iron Order, which is a brotherhood of knights, essentially under the command of this king. And Hecarim was, like, super extremely good at being in the Iron Order. He's just fantastic at killing and riding on I don't know what knights do. They kill things and ride on horses, I guess. And he was super good at that. And the commander of the Iron Order is like, wow, that guy's super good at killing and riding on horses. Maybe he should be the commander. But then it was like, oh, no, he's also sadistic and a bit of a psychopath, and he likes killing way too much. Maybe we shouldn't make him the leader. Then he makes the big mistake of telling Hecarim, hey, you are way too evil to be leader of this thing, so I'm not going to make you leader. And strangely, no one knows how this happened, but in the next battle, the commander finds himself cut off and surrounded by enemies, and Hecarim is like, I could save him and then never be commander myself, or I could leave him to die and then just take commandership over the Iron Legion. I wonder which one I would do if I was a good person. Since I'm not a good person, I'm just gonna let him die, and now the Iron Order swears allegiance to me. So, you know, mistakes were made all around. Hecarim becomes the leader of the Iron Order, and he strikes up not necessarily a friendship, but certainly a respect relationship with Callista, who's the king's general. And when the king's wife is poisoned by an assassin due to an accident, and Callista goes away to find a cure for the poison, Hecarim is like, well, I seem to be the top-ranking military commander around here, so let's do some killings. Doesn't help that the king is completely just mind-rottingly full of grief. He's completely going insane and crazy with grief over his wife's illness and eventual death. And he's getting really, really paranoid. So Hecarim has plenty of excuses to go out and kill and murder and gather glory and money for himself. Escalating eventually, when the queen dies, into foreign wars. Like, Hecarim basically goes, hey, you know, that assassin was probably sent by some foreign country or something. Why don't we just go out and murder everyone? Hecarim basically takes this as a grand opportunity to be the biggest possible bastard he could possibly be. Then Callista comes back, and she's like, I found a cure for the poison. No, the wife is already dead. Well, that's not great. And the king is like, why didn't you come with the poison sooner? Throw her in jail. And so she's in jail. But Hecarim is like, you found a cure for the impossible poison? What was that place like? And Callista's like, well, they're pretty rich, and they have a lot of magical artifacts. And Hecarim's like, oh, you should tell me more about that. In fact, let's go there right now and say, thanks for trying, or something. In fact, Hecarim convinces Callista that maybe if the king goes to the Blessed Isles himself and asks them to revive his wife, and they're like, no, she's dead, we can't revive her, maybe the king will finally come to his senses, right? Isn't that right, Callista? He'll just come to his sense. Like, sure, if we just go, it's going to be fine. And Callista, for some reason, is convinced by this. They go to the Blessed Isles, and Callista's like, look, they can tell you the waters of life are not going to revive your wife. I'm sorry, King Boy, your wife is dead. And the king is like, kill absolutely everybody until they make my wife not be dead anymore. And Callista's like, I don't think I'm going to do that. And then Hecarim stabs her. He stabs her, and all of his knights stab her. And then they just go off and do what they do, which is killing and murdering and stealing everything around them. Now, Hecarim is kind of absorbed with this activity, his little fun time game, so he doesn't really notice that, hang on, everything's about to go terribly, terribly wrong. A spell cast by the ruined king, now ruined by his grief and everything, destroys the entire Blessed Isles, turns them into the Shadow Isles, and turns everybody on the Shadow Isles into cursed undead, except for Yorick, but we'll get to him later. And Hecarim doesn't really manage to make it out of that, so he's consumed by the black mist and enslaved by it, and he's fused into one creature with his mighty warhorse, and he becomes the Ghost Rider character that we see him as today. This is sort of the corrupted form of him as he has been twisted by the black mist into an avatar of hatred and destruction and murder. Hecarim also has a color story called No One Lives, which has no plot. Like, it's one of those stories that doesn't really have any plot. It's just a little vignette showing you what kind of thing Hecarim spends his time doing. In this particular story, some people, for whatever reason, have gone to the Shadow Isles, which is probably stupid and very bad, but they've gone to the Shadow Isles and they have run into Hecarim, and the story is basically about him scaring the hell out of them and then murdering them and enjoying that murder oh so very much too much. And it has a little bit of a reflection from Hecarim himself that he is losing his memories. He's losing the personality that he once had and essentially becoming just a creature that kills. He really, as it says here, the spirits of the dead circled Hecarim, beholden to him as their killer, and he reveled in the surging joy of battle. He ignored the wailing spirits. He had no interest in enslaving them. Leave such petty cruelties to the chain warden, that's Thresh. All Hecarim cared for was the killing. And he also reflects that he should know, like when Hecarim uses his ultimate and he charges and he has all those Ghost Riders riding along with him, those are the Iron Order. Those are his men. Those are his subordinates. He should know them. He should feel something for them, but he doesn't, because who he is as a person is being wiped away by his centuries of undeath. Same as what's happening with Callista. And that's sort of the tiny little bit of pathos that we get with Hecarim is that, okay, there is that tragedy of lost identity, of a person being reduced to only their most violent components, which is what happens with Callista as well. Everything noble, everything good about her is wiped away, and she becomes the spirit of vengeance. And with Hecarim, it's like all the stuff, all the parts of him that weren't a murderous psychopath are just gone now, and now he's just all about the murder time all the time. Which leads us on to his character design. Now, as I mentioned up front, I think, did I do that, or was that another take that I deleted, and now I can't remember which take I'm on? Anyway, if I didn't mention it before, Hecarim is an old champion. He's from 2012, and therefore, his character design was not really designed with the modern Shadow Isles in mind. The modern Shadow Isles generally have a, especially when you think of something like Callista, Thresh, and the like, they have a certain focus, also with Yorick, of a rather clean aesthetic, really, with more of a focus on the ghostliness of the character rather than delving very deep into sort of outrageous monstrousness. Hecarim, on the other hand, is designed with a little bit more of a Warhammer 40,000 aesthetic, or, well, yeah, 40,000 or just Warhammer old world stuff, Age of Sigmar, is that what they're calling it now? In the sense that he's so freaking extra. Like, he's so extra. He's like old Mordekaiser levels of extra. Like, he's got spikes, and there's skulls, and there's more spikes, and he's got, like, this lion face on his stomach with big teeth and stuff, and he's got his helmet, like, with glowing eyes and jagged teeth, and then he's got, like, a spike on his head, and he's got spikes on his shoulders, and he's got spikes on his legs, and he's got spikes on everything. On his spurs, spikes everywhere. Like, he's designed essentially like a Saturday morning cartoon villain, if they were allowed to be a little bit more edgy with their character designs. It is very over the top. It is very extra, And that fits very well into the conception of League of Legends as it was in 2012, where it was like these are larger-than-life, ridiculous cartoon characters, extreme archetypes taken to like their fullest potential, and they all fight in the League of Legends, and that was sort of the premise of the game, which is why Nasus is just so... He's literally just Anubis. Like, that's his character design, because that's literally what he was supposed to be. Whereas with the new conception of League of Legends, rather than being just wild, exclusively archetypal characters, they are being invested with a lot more individualistic character. They're being taken down a peg from standing as symbols of only their archetype and becoming a little bit more fleshed out, I want to say. It's ironic to say that about an undead, but they're becoming a little bit more fleshed out, a little bit more rounded. Not that they're not still, you know, massive, oversimplified archetypes, but it's less nowadays. And you can kind of see that change with Hecarim compared to someone like Callista, compared to someone like Thresh, where you can just, like, skulls and skulls and spikes and spikes and skulls and spikes and spikes and skulls and skulls and spikes and spikes and skulls. And in 2012, it probably worked okay. Nowadays, though, like, it's so over the top is the thing with Hecarim. Like, it's not really, like, yeah, he's a monstrous ghost rider who wants to murder and doesn't do anything except murder. But the trouble is, and this is the thing, like, Callista has a character design that sort of harkens back to who she was before she became a cursed undead, right? She's got the armor, and she's got, like, the spears through her back, and she's got all these little hints that this was once a person, and it expresses that tragedy of losing what you are in favor of becoming a specter, like a pale shadow of who you once were that's sort of reduced to a single component. Hecarim doesn't have that. So, like, where was he supposed to be from? Where did he wear that armor also while commanding the Iron Legion? Is that their official uniform? Like, who looked at that and went, yeah, we're probably the good guys? Like, no, of course not. His armor and his character design are designed to be a terrifying, scary, spectral ghost rider. They're not designed to communicate anything whatsoever about the person that inhabits the armor. And that's really the trouble, is that they have invented a backstory, an origin story for Hecarim that's a lot more elaborate, that's a lot more specific than what his current character design can actually support. His current character design says he's a Saturday morning cartoon, like he's Skeletor, basically, is what's going on here. Whereas his story says that, no, he's not Skeletor, he's more of an Iago-style villain, if you read Othello or something like that, where this is supposed to be, his ghost version is supposed to be an exaggerated caricature of who he is as a person, which is like a vengeful, murderous, greedy sociopath, basically. But it's not supposed to be, like, that much over the top. And so, that's really the core of most of my criticism of Hecarim. Outside of that, like, he's old. You can kind of, like, if you zoom in on the textures on his spear, you can kind of see it's just really old texture work. And it's a really old modeling job that they've done, because, like, the idea of Hecarim, like, the idea of his character design, insofar as I can tell, is that he's a suit of armor that has been animated, right? You've got these armor platings that kind of sit atop this blue, bright body, which is not really supposed to be a body. It's supposed to be it's supposed to be an empty shell with a ghostly hellfire sort of animating and illuminating it. Which, again, on the character model, if he was made with a modern rig and with, like, modern League of Legends production capabilities, he would actually look like that. But as it stands, he just kind of looks like a dude whose body is blue and glowing, and then someone has, like, super glued armor plating onto it here and there every once in a while. And you can kind of see the animator here is trying to do the thing. You can see how the upper jaw of the mouth thing that he's got going on moves independently of the lower jaw, which is sort of implying the idea that these are free-floating armor pieces that can move relatively independently of each other. But it's like, it doesn't really work. And also, what is this face? Let me see if I can... Yeah, the controls on Timo.gg elude me sometimes. Like, what is this face? What's he supposed to look like? He doesn't look scary, he looks silly. Like, he looks like a villain from, again, like Saturday Morning Cartoon, but specifically I'm thinking of something like, what's it called? Not Jak and Daxter, but the one that's in space. Ratchet and Clank. He looks like a Ratchet and Clank character. Like, something about that particular design aesthetic for a face just makes him look like a Ratchet and Clank character to me, and it's not. He doesn't look scary at all. He really doesn't. He just looks like an overzealous cosplayer who's a centaur, or something along those lines. And that's like, in terms of if you wanted to update him, I think you could do a lot just by changing his textures. I think, and this is where I need to be careful because I am not a 3D animator, I'm certainly not a rigger, but I think it would be possible to, without having to completely re-rig the model, to make the blue parts of him translucent, like make them transparent at least, so you can see through them. But it would still, no, because that would still require you have to model the armor plating, which is right now mostly a texture, I think, and then you have to model that as an actual, yeah. It would be a whole thing to try and update him. I think there are small things you could do with texture updates alone that could make it a lot more obvious that he's supposed to be an empty suit of armor animated by a spirit, but I just, like this, every time I look at this thing, I'm just like, this is goofy. Like, this thing is silly. It just looks ridiculous. This doesn't look scary. He looks like he's cosplaying a shark who doesn't know where the fin goes. Like, I don't, it's, He's not really a scary character design at all, is the trouble with Hecarim. Well. But yeah, I mean, most of my complaints just basically come down to he's an old design. Like, he's an old design that fit into a conception of League of Legends that used to be pretty good, but which just isn't anymore. So let's talk about how to update him. Like, if they were to give Hecarim a visual update at some point, which, God, I hope they do, what would I do about it? Well, I would just, like, get rid of 90% of his spikes. Like, as number one, just 90% of all the spikiness, all, like, the teeth imagery around the collar and on the face of the helmet and on this there, and the teeth of the skulls, which are spiky, and the spikes. Get rid of 90% of that. Make the armor more like it's an actual armor of someone who would be a soldier in an army, rather than someone who's cosplaying at a heavy metal convention. So that it looks more like actual military armor that has then been twisted by darkness, right? So you start with a basic plate mail of the kind that a knight would wear in a human army, and then you start twisting it by adding details, like adding little expressions of who Hecarim is as a character, like blood spatters, for example, bloodstains, or like little, you know, battle scars of where it's taken damage and stuff like that, and then maybe some places where the metal has kind of been twisted into a spike, right? Rather than this thing is clearly made to be a spiky piece of armor, have a piece of metal that was not meant to be spiky, but the hatred of Hecarim inside has twisted it. Get that, make it more a thing of, oh, he has sullied the armor. He has changed the armor into something terrible. Because that's what Hecarim did as a character, is he was born into this order of honorable knights, and then he, through his terrible, terrible leadership and his cruelty and his callousness and his greed, changed it into something terrible, right? So he's a corrupter. To emphasize a little bit more of that character, I'd also, like, doing a centaur character like this is standard. Like, that's how we do centaurs. That's how we think of centaurs. Which is where I think there's an opportunity to be a little bit more creative, like to do something a little bit unexpected, where instead of making a centaur with armor plating, why not actually do what the story says? Like, the story says he was a person on a horse who was then fused together with that horse by evil shadow magic. My thinking on that one is, if evil shadow magic fuses you to a horse's body, it's probably not gonna look all nice and clean like this. It's probably gonna be a horrifying mangled monstrosity that is not supposed to be possible to exist. So I would take his upper torso and move it back a little bit to where a rider would be sitting, so that he's a human, like, torso coming out the back of a horse. And then you could have the horse be like something, either give the horse no head, like just an empty neck with, maybe with blood spurting out of it, or do something to make him not just an evil centaur, but a twisted, monstrous parody of an evil centaur. Like, something that looks wrong, something that looks like it shouldn't exist, something where the anatomy doesn't make sense, something that looks more monstrous rather than just kind of aggressive and scary. That would be what I would do, like, to make him more interesting, rather than, oh, he's a centaur, and then we put some ghost costume on him to say, okay, this is what happens when you let evil magic play science god. those would be my thinkings on him. Hecarim as a character, though, in the lore that he's got, is a compelling villain, I think, because the thing that drives him to do the things he does are entirely comprehensible motives. Like, he doesn't want to cause the Blessed Isles to become the Shadow Isles. He doesn't really want to have any of this happen. He has no ambitions to live forever or, like, whatever. No, he's just an evil, greedy jerk of a guy who likes killing, who likes the glory of combat and battle, and who doesn't mind backstabbing people to get what he wants. He's manipulative, but in the service of something that you can understand as a person, right? And that's something that's kind of important for a character that's as high concept as, you know, as a ghost centaur like him, is to give it a like, why does this thing exist? Not because of some ancient prophecy or evil conspiracy of wizards or whatever, but because one guy chose to be just a huge bag of dicks, just a huge garbage sack of a person. This is what happens to people when they give in to their darkest impulses, when we act dishonorably. These are the consequences of that behavior, is to be twisted into something like that. You know, the road to hell is paved with whatever. Like, the little sins that mount up to create an actual monster. Like, that's, to me, that's more interesting. That's a good way to frame him. But it does require that his character design is eventually updated so that that subtlety comes across. Because at the moment, there's absolutely 0 none things about Hecarim that are even a little bit subtle. Anyway, thank you very much for watching What's the Deal with Hecarim. It's a fairly simple video compared to some of the extended discussions I sometimes have about these characters. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like, comment, bell icon, do the thing. I mean, I find it hard to summon the enthusiasm to do these calls to action at the end of a video because it feels so mandatory, but liking, commenting, and subscribing does help. Like, if you want more of this kind of content to exist, those are good things you can do to make it happen. If you want to support the channel directly, then my work is supported through Patreon, which helps me pay for rent and internet connection and not dying, just sort of in general. So if you want to help there with a monthly subscription, you can do so. If you want to give me a tip, like just a one-time little, hey, thumbs up on the thing, buddy, then there's a couple of links down in the description you can use to do that without having to sign up for a monthly thing. And of course, if you're not willing or able to do that, that's completely okay. It's completely fine. I don't mind it. Because I know times are tough all over. Certainly, I feel that. And if you just watch the videos, that's okay. That's more than enough. And I'm very grateful that you've watched the video this far, because the thing the algorithm cares about nowadays is watch time, I think. Heck if I know. Anyway, if you haven't enjoyed this video, there's a dislike button down below. Although, I should warn you that when you click the dislike button, your heart will be weighed on a set of scales against a feather of truth. And if the sins outweigh the virtues, you, my friend, are probably gonna be fine. I mean, I don't really think anything happens. It's just a whole, like, these guys, like, it's gonna be this thing, and it wanders into your room at night, and it pulls its arm into your chest, pulls out your heart. It does a whole weighing ceremony. There's a choir, there's, like, people in robes chanting stuff. I don't know what the hell was going on. And it's like, oh, your sins outweigh your virtues. Then they just put your heart back in your body and leave. And I think I'm cursed. I don't know if I'm cursed. I think I'm cursed. But nothing's happened yet. I mean, I can't see myself in mirrors anymore, but it's probably fine. Yeah. Hit the dislike button if you didn't like the video. It's okay.